Listen closely, because what you're about to hear is considered a conspiracy theory. But this is not just a random story someone made up on the internet. This story is built on real locations, actual military bases, real people, and real eyewitnesses who have been telling the same disturbing details for decades. Some parts of this story are documented fact. Other parts have no official proof at all. And by the end of this video, I'll tell you exactly which parts fall into each category. This story starts in the USA. At the far eastern tip of Long Island, New York, there's a place called Montauk. If you look at it on a map, it almost feels isolated from everything else. It is surrounded by ocean on 3 sides. Waves crash onto the cliff rocky walls, and sitting above it all is a massive concrete radar tower. It doesn't look welcoming. That place is called Camp Hero. Officially, Camp Hero was a military base built during World War II. Its purpose was simple: to protect the United States from enemy ships and submarines approaching New York. Massive coastal guns were installed underground. Radar systems were built above ground. It was actually the largest radar of its kind at the time it was built. No other was built like this one. Soldiers lived and worked there, watching the ocean day and night. And for years, everything about it was normal military operation. But then something changed. 'Cause after the war ended, the base didn't shut down completely. Parts of it stayed active. Parts of it became restricted. Some parts are still restricted even today. And parts of it were never explained. First, locals began to notice strange things. Convoys arriving late at night. Vehicles entering the base, but never leaving. Areas that were suddenly off limits, even to some military personnel. And then there was the radar tower, the massive structure that still stands today. Officially, it was an FPS-35 radar system, built to detect incoming aircraft during the Cold War. But people who lived nearby started noticing something strange about it. They said it wasn't always pointing out toward the ocean. Sometimes it was aimed inland, and no one could explain why. At first, most people didn't question it. It was probably just scanning the whole area, they said. This was the Cold War. Military secrecy was normal. People trusted that whatever was happening was necessary. But over time, the rumors started to grow. Workers talked quietly among themselves. Some claimed there were underground levels beneath Camp Hero. Not just storage areas, but entire sections hidden below the surface. Areas far larger than anything listed in official blueprints. Rooms filled with equipment no one recognized. And doors that required special clearance to open. Doors that most people were never allowed near. And then there were the sounds locals could hear. Low humming noises coming from beneath the ground. Not constant, but frequent enough to make people uneasy. People living near the base reported feeling strange sensations. Headaches, dizziness, a feeling of pressure inside their skull. Some said they felt anxious for no reason. Others said they felt like they were being watched, even when they knew they were alone. Most dismissed it. It was easier that way. But then came the day the base officially shut down. In 1981, Camp Hero was decommissioned. The military left, the gates were closed, and the land was eventually turned into a public park. The buildings remain, the tower remains, and beneath the surface, no one really knows what remains. Because when the military left, they didn't explain everything. They didn't release full records. They didn't answer the questions people were starting to ask. And that's when the stories truly began. Details from the people who claimed they had been inside. People who said Camp Hero wasn't just a radar station. It was something else entirely. Something secret, something experimental. One of those people would later become the most important voice in the entire Montauk story. His name was Preston Nichols. And according to Preston, Camp Hero wasn't just a military base. It was the location of one of the most secretive experiments ever conducted. Experiments involving the human mind. Experiments involving time. Experiments that, if true, would change absolutely everything we understand about reality itself. But even before Nichols ever spoke publicly, there were already signs that something unusual had happened there. Locals who explored the abandoned base reported finding things that didn't make sense. Fresh cables, not old cables as you would expect from somewhere shut down. Locked doors, equipment that looked newer than the buildings themselves. And tunnels that seemed to go deeper than expected. Some entrances were completely sealed. Others were blocked off with no way to go further. Almost like someone didn't want anyone finding what was below. 'Cause if Nichols was telling the truth, what happened at Montauk wasn't meant to be discovered. But stories like this have a way of surfacing. And that's exactly what happened. Because Preston Nichols wasn't the only one. Others came forward, each with their own memories and experiences. And disturbingly, their stories began to match. They spoke of experiments conducted deep underground. They spoke of technology capable of influencing thoughts. They spoke of things that shouldn't exist, and things that definitely shouldn't have been possible. But before we go deeper into those claims, you need to understand one critical truth. 'Cause this story didn't start at Montauk, it started somewhere else. With another experiment, another military operation. An experiment that officially never happened, but one that many believe was the beginning of everything. The experiment known as the Philadelphia experiment. And according to those who claim to know the truth, Montauk was built just to continue it. So, before Montauk, there was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And according to one of the most persistent conspiracy theories in modern history, something happened there in 1943 that the US military has spent decades trying to deny ever occurred. This story doesn't begin with mind control. It doesn't begin underground. It begins with a Navy ship, and an experiment designed to make it invisible. The ship was called the USS Eldridge. It was a destroyer escort. Not a massive battleship, not famous, not important to history, at least not officially. But according to witnesses and later claims, the Eldridge was chosen for something highly experimental. The military wanted to test a theory, a way to bend electromagnetic fields around an object. The goal was simple: make the ship invisible to enemy radar. If radar waves couldn't bounce back from the ship, it would effectively disappear from detection. This technology was called radar cloaking. And while versions of it exist today in stealth aircraft, what they were attempting in 1943 was far more extreme. They weren't just trying to hide it from radar, they were trying to hide it completely. According to this story, massive generators were installed onto the USS Eldridge. Large electromagnetic field coils, powerful enough to create a field around the entire ship. On the day of the experiment, the ship was docked at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Their crew members were on board. And when the generators were activated, something happened. Witnesses claimed the ship began to glow. A faint greenish-blue haze formed around the hull. It intensified fast. The air itself seemed to distort. Then, suddenly, the ship was gone. Not hidden or camouflaged. Completely gone. Moments later, it reappeared. And when it did, something was very wrong. According to the claims, crew members were found in horrifying conditions. Some were disoriented, some were violently ill, some were unconscious, and some were reportedly fused onto the ship itself. Their bodies partially embedded into metal surfaces. Some weren't physically harmed, but mentally, they were never the same. They were confused, of not knowing where they had been. Officially, none of this happened. The US Navy has always denied it. They say the Philadelphia experiment never existed. They say that USS Eldridge was never involved in any cloaking experiment. And according to official records, the ship wasn't even in Philadelphia at the time. But conspiracy theories don't survive for decades without something fueling them. 'Cause over the years, individuals began coming forward. People claiming they had knowledge of this experiment. People claiming they had been involved. And one of the strangest parts of the story wasn't just that the ship became invisible. It was what some claimed happened during that invisibility. They said the ship didn't just disappear. They said it went somewhere else. Some claimed it appeared briefly in Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of miles away, before returning to Philadelphia, as if it had moved through space instantly. And that's when the theory began to evolve. Because if electromagnetic fields could bend radar and bend light, what else could they bend? Some theorized they had accidentally bent space itself. Not just invisibility, but displacement. And according to later claims, the military didn't abandon the research. They continued it, but not in Philadelphia. Somewhere more isolated, more controlled. They chose Montauk. Years later, this is where Preston Nichols enters the story. Nichols claimed he had worked at Montauk in the 1970s and early 1980s, and according to him, the technology used at Camp Hero wasn't new. It was based on what had been discovered during the Philadelphia experiment. He said the military had learned something important, something dangerous, that electromagnetic fields could interact with human consciousness. Not just physical matter, but the human mind itself. And they wanted to explore it further. Nichols claimed that Montauk became the continuation of that research. Not focused on ships, but focused on people. He said they were studying the human brain and how thoughts could interact with electromagnetic energy, studying whether the mind itself could influence reality. And according to him, they found a way. But Nichols wasn't alone. Others later supported parts of his story. Another man named Al Bielek claimed he had been present during the Philadelphia experiment. He said he had been on the USS Eldridge, and that when the ship disappeared, he didn't die. He didn't get fused into the ship, but he was thrown forward in time, to Montauk. Yes, that's right. To the year 1983. Bielek claimed he woke up there very confused. Disoriented, he was taken into the Montauk facility, where scientists already knew who he was, as if they had been expecting him. He said Montauk wasn't just continuing the research. It was connected to the original experiment itself. Now, you don't have to believe this, and many people don't. But what makes the Montauk story so compelling isn't just the claims. It's the location, because Camp Hero was real. The radar tower was real. The underground structures were real, and the secrecy was very real. It raises the question, if nothing unusual ever happened there, why was so much hidden? Why were parts of the facility sealed? Why were records incomplete? And why did multiple individuals tell stories that aligned so closely? So, Nichols claimed Montauk had a specific purpose. Not invisibility, not radar cloaking. Something far more unsettling. He said they were trying to amplify psychic abilities. He spoke about one individual in particular. One person whose abilities were stronger than anyone else. Someone they used repeatedly who became the center of everything. His name was Duncan Cameron. According to Nichols, Duncan wasn't just part of the experiment. He was the key to it. This story had already crossed into territory that sounded impossible. Not just secret, not just classified. Because according to Nichols, deep beneath Camp Hero, there was a machine being used on humans. Not a weapon or a radar system. It was a chair. But this wasn't an ordinary chair. It was called the Montauk chair. And Nichols claimed when someone sat in it and was connected to it with the wiring, it had the ability to turn human thoughts into physical reality. To understand why this chair existed, you have to understand the radar tower above it. Officially, the tower was built to detect aircraft. But Nichols claimed its true purpose wasn't just detection. It was amplification. He said the radar system could generate enormous amounts of electromagnetic energy. Energy that could be redirected. That energy, according to Nichols, was connected directly to the Montauk chair below. The chair itself was surrounded by electronic equipment. Coils, transmitters, receivers, all connected to the massive radar system above ground. The person sitting in the chair wasn't just sitting there. They became part of the circuit. Their brainwaves were amplified, their thoughts strengthened, broadcast outward, and according to Nichols, those thoughts didn't just remain thoughts. They became real. This is where Duncan enters the story. Nichols claimed Duncan had unusually strong psychic abilities. Specifically, the ability to visualize things clearly and intensely. The clearer the visualization, the stronger the result. When Duncan sat in the chair and focused his mind on an object, the machine amplified that mental image, and the object would physically appear. At first, they tested simple things. Small objects, basic shapes. Nothing dangerous just yet. And according to Nichols, it did. But they didn't stop there. Because once they realized what was possible, they began testing more complex ideas. They asked Duncan to visualize locations, places he had never been, and somehow they could see those locations, as if his mind was acting like a projector, seeing real places from miles away, places he couldn't physically access. And it worked consistently enough that they trusted it. trusted it enough to push further. They then began experimenting with other human minds. They wanted to find out if emotions could be transmitted, if behavior could be controlled. Nichols claimed they could broadcast signals that affected people outside the base, influencing mood, influencing decisions, causing anxiety or calm, depending on the signal. People in nearby towns reportedly experienced strange emotional shifts, sudden fear, sudden sadness and anger. Without knowing why, most never connected it to Montauk. But Nichols believed it wasn't coincidence. He says they were being affected on purpose. And the experiments didn't stop there, because the scientists weren't just interested in influencing thoughts. They wanted to know if thoughts could create physical openings. Nichols claimed that when Duncan focused intensely enough, the machine could create what he described as a time window, a visible distortion in space, like looking through heat waves rising from asphalt. Except instead of seeing the road behind it, you saw somewhere else. Another location and another time. A window into somewhere that shouldn't have been visible. They could observe distant places and different moments in time, as if time itself had become accessible. And according to Nichols, they didn't just observe it. They interacted with it. Objects could be sent through, retrieved, tested. This wasn't just observation. It was manipulation. The implications were enormous. If true, it meant time wasn't fixed. It was something different. It could be accessed and controlled. And that's when things began to go wrong. Because controlling something that powerful isn't simple. And using the human mind as the key made it unpredictable. Nichols said, Duncan's emotional state affected the machine. If Duncan was calm, the results were stable. If Duncan was stressed, tired, or afraid, the results became unstable, unpredictable, and dangerous. And one day, something happened that they couldn't control. Nichols said Duncan became overwhelmed during one of the sessions. He was exhausted, and his thoughts became unfocused, chaotic even, and the machine amplified everything. Not his intentional thoughts, but his subconscious fears, his nightmares. Something appeared, not an object, but a creature. He described it as large and dark. Unnatural, not something that belonged to Earth. It wasn't summoned intentionally. It was created from fear itself, from Duncan's mind. Nichols said it moved through the facility, causing destruction, causing panic. Scientists and personnel fled. No one could control it. It wasn't physical in the normal sense. And the only way to stop it was to shut down the machine. Nichols claimed he and others rushed to disable the equipment, powering down the radar, breaking the connection, stopping the amplification, and when the machine shut off, the creature disappeared. Just as quickly as it had appeared. After that, everything changed. The experiment stopped. The project was shut down. Personnel were dismissed and told to not ever speak about what had happened. Records were sealed. According to Nichols, memories were erased. That's right, erased. He claimed he didn't even remember his involvement at first, that his memories returned years later, gradually and unexpectedly. And when they did, he began telling his story. But here's the thing. There is no official record of the Montauk chair. No official document confirming its existence at all. No military admission, only stories. But documents like this would obviously be sealed or destroyed. Only eyewitness accounts are available, which raises the question. If the Montauk Project was real, why would they hide it so completely? Why wouldn't they continue? And the answer, according to Nichols, is because the Montauk experiments went much further than anyone realized possible. Further than just influencing thoughts, further than observing time. He said they found a way to travel through it. Not just see it, not just interact with it, but physically move through it. And according to multiple witnesses, they did. If what Preston Nichols claimed about the Montauk chair was true, then the next step wasn't observation. It was entry, because once they could create a window, the obvious question became, could they go through it? Not just send signals, not just send objects, but send a person. According to Nichols, that's exactly what they attempted. He claimed the Montauk chair wasn't just connected to the radar tower. It was connected to a much larger system. A system capable of stabilizing what he called a time tunnel. Not a metaphor, a literal tunnel. A passage that existed outside normal space. Created by focusing electromagnetic energy and human consciousness together. Duncan Cameron again remained at the center of it. Because the machine required his mind. His ability to visualize precise locations and moments. He wasn't just imagining random places. He was targeting specific coordinates. Specific dates, specific points in time. And once the tunnel stabilized, they began sending objects through it. At first, simple things. Tools. Recording devices. They wanted to see if anything would come back, if it would survive, if it would appear where they wanted it to. According to Nichols, it did. Objects sent forward in time would disappear from the present, and reappear later. Objects sent backward would appear before they had been sent, breaking the normal order of cause and effect. And once they confirmed objects could survive the journey, they moved to the next phase. Human subjects. Nichols claimed volunteers were selected. Some military personnel, some civilians. And, disturbingly, he also claimed some were children. He said children were used because their minds were easier to influence, easier to control, less resistant. He claimed these children were brought to Montauk under various pretexts. Some were told they were participating in educational programs. Others were reportedly runaways, individuals less likely to be missed, less likely to be traced. And according to Nichols, these children were trained, not physically, but mentally prepared to interact with the machine. Trained to focus their thoughts. He said the first human tests were terrifying, because no one knew what the person would experience, or if they would return at all. Some did return. And when they did, their stories were difficult to explain. Some described seeing different landscapes, different environments, not Earth as they knew it. Others described seeing the same world, but at different points in time. Future cities, destroyed environments, places that hadn't happened yet, or maybe never would. One of the most persistent claims involved traveled to the year 6037. Nichols and others later said they were sent there. They described a future Earth that was almost unrecognizable. Advanced technology, floating structures, a world that had changed completely. And they claimed they were helped there, assisted by people from that time. People who already understood time travel. People who had mastered it. According to the story, these future individuals helped them return safely, guided them back through the tunnel, back to Montauk, back to their own time. Now, there is no proof this happened. No physical evidence or verified documentation. Only testimony. But those stories didn't stop there. Because Nichols claimed Montauk wasn't just connected to the future, it was also connected to the past. Connected directly to the Philadelphia experiment itself. He claimed the two experiments became linked. That the USS Eldridge didn't just disappear randomly. It was pulled into the Montauk Tunnel, connected across decades. He said that during certain moments the tunnel connected 1943 and 1983, allowing movement between them, allowing individuals from the ship to arrive at Montauk, and individuals from Montauk to observe the ship. If true, it would mean the Philadelphia experiment wasn't an isolated event, it was part of a larger system. A system completed years later. A system capable of connecting different points in time. But as the experiments continued, something else became clear. The human mind wasn't designed for this. Many subjects experienced severe psychological effects. Confusion and memory loss. Disorientation. Some reportedly couldn't remember where they had been. Others couldn't even remember their own name or who they were. And some reportedly never returned at all, disappearing completely, lost somewhere inside the tunnel, or somewhere else entirely. Nichols claimed the project leaders became increasingly concerned, not about the ethics, not about the people, but about losing control because the more they used the machine, the more unpredictable it became. They couldn't fully control it, not reliably. And that's when the project ended. He claimed that during that final session, Duncan Cameron had reached a breaking point. Mentally exhausted, emotionally overwhelmed. And in that state, when he created something so horrific and unintentionally, it forced everyone to make a decision. shut it down forever, destroying components, severing the connection between the radar tower and the chair. And when the system finally shut down, the presence disappeared. The tunnel collapsed, the connection ended. And just like that, the Montauk Project was over. Officially, none of this ever happened. There was no admission or proof. No explanations. The base was decommissioned shortly afterward. Personnel were reassigned, equipment was removed, and Camp Hero was eventually turned into a public park. Today, people walk there freely. They hike the trails and they explore the bunkers. They stand beneath the radar tower, most never realizing the stories connected to it. Most never questioning what may have happened beneath their feet. But now, after hearing the full story, it's time to separate fact from claim. Because some parts of this story are absolutely real, and others have no verified evidence. Here's what is confirmed. Camp Hero existed. It was a real military installation, built during World War II. It did contain radar systems. It was involved in coastal defense, and parts of the facility were restricted. The radar tower still exists today. You can see it, touch it, and stand beside it. There is nothing secret about its existence. That part is fact. It's also true that the military conducted countless classified experiments during and after World War II. Many were not revealed until decades later. Programs involving radar, psychological research, electromagnetic testing, all real, all documented, and secrecy was normal. During any war, secrecy is normal, that is fact. Now here's where the evidence stops. There is no verified proof of the Montauk chair. No official military documents confirming it existed. No physical machine ever recovered. No photographs verified as authentic. Only testimony, only personal accounts. There is also no verified proof of time tunnels. No confirmed evidence of human time travel. No scientific confirmation that such a machine ever existed. The Philadelphia experiment itself is also officially denied. The U.S. Navy maintains it never happened. And official ship records do not confirm the claims made in the conspiracy. Preston Nichols did publish books describing his experiences. He gave interviews, he told his story publicly, but his claims were never confirmed by independent evidence. Al Bielek also shared similar claims. But again, no physical proof was ever produced. No recovered technology. No verified records. Only stories. And this is where the Montauk Project exists. In the space between fact and mystery. Because the location is real. The military presence was real. The secrecy was real and still is real. Some believe Nichols and others were telling the truth. Others believe their memories were mistaken. Or influenced by other factors. And some believe the truth lies somewhere in between. Because history has shown that not everything is revealed immediately. Some secrets remain hidden for decades. Some truth never surface at all. And places like Camp Hero, places with restricted pasts, naturally attract stories, questions, and speculation. Today, Camp Hero is quiet. Whatever happened there, if anything happened there, left no confirmed trace. But stories like this don't survive for decades without reason. Whether they began as truth, misunderstanding, or something else entirely. It is something each person has to decide for themselves. The Montauk Project remains one of the most famous conspiracy theories ever told. Not because it's proven, but because it's possible enough to make people wonder. And sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that can never be fully proven or fully disproven. If you enjoyed this story, please help us by hitting the like button and subscribe to our page for more real and explainable stories.